Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Grace Mattern. I live in Northwood. I'm here to speak from my over 40-year career in the victim services field. I spent 30 years as the executive director of the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. I'm not here to speak on their behalf. I'm speaking on my own behalf, but I'm speaking from the experience I gained in all those years in working with victims. You've heard from a lot of victims today. At the beginning of the hearing, Representative Cushing said, please listen to the victims today, and not surprisingly, you have heard different points of view about the death penalty from different victims who have spoken to you today. But the majority of the victims who have spoken do not support the death penalty, and there's research that backs that up, and that's what I want to speak to. It's also consistent with the work that I've done in victim services in finding that what victims most seek is healing and moving on with their lives. And there's research that shows that the death penalty, in fact, doesn't help with that. There was a study done in 2012 by a researcher at the University of Texas in Austin and a researcher from the University of Minnesota. They interviewed 20 families from Minnesota. There had families that were survivors of, who were co-victims of homicide victims, where the perpetrator was given life without parole, and 20 families where the murderer was in Texas, where the murderer was given the death penalty. Minnesota does not have a death penalty. They tracked these survivors over years and found that over time, the people in Minnesota reported better physical and psychological health and more satisfaction with the criminal justice system. And the researchers attributed that to the lack of control that the Texas residents felt about what happened with the cases because of how long death penalty cases are tied up in appeals. And every time that an appeal would come up, the murderer is back in their lives, back in the news, and with life without parole, the families of murder victims found that the murderer goes off to prison, nobody ever hears from him again, fades from the news, and they're more able to go on with their lives. There was another study done by the criminologist Scott Ballum in 2007, and he looked at media interviews with family or friends of murder victims conducted around the time that the murderer was executed. He found that victims' families reported feeling some kind of peace or relief in only 17% of the more than 150 cases in which there were public statements made. Families reported feeling a sense of closure in only 2.5% of these cases, and by contrast, in 20% of cases, families explicitly said that the execution did not bring them healing or closure. So when politicians or legislators use the reason of standing with victims as a way to justify the death penalty, it doesn't square with the actual experience of victims. In fact, one of the researchers, Marilyn Armour, the researcher from the University of Minnesota, said that rather than listen to the families of homicide victims, society often uses these people and their pain to score political points in the death penalty debate. I urge you to listen to the voices of the majority of victims of homicide who do not support the death penalty and to vote to pass House Bill 455. Thank you.
Thank you very much.